I'm Tom Laux, Communications Director, City of Marshfield. Thank you for joining me on Council Preview. And I have Steve Barg, City Administrator, sitting next to me. We're going to highlight the next council meeting and refer back to what happened at the last council meeting before we begin this discussion. We have a few things we want to talk about, at least Steve does, here on the business grant that was initiated and voted on by the council during our last meeting, and it's already been mostly handed out, as I'm understanding, right?
It has, Tom, and this is really a great success story. And it starts with the mayor, Bob McManus, who contacted me one morning and said, Steve, there's a lot of people hurting, a lot of businesses, small businesses, and they need our help to get through COVID-19. They're struggling. They've been told they can't open, and they've still got rent to pay, utilities to pay. And he brought something to the council. His proposal had the funding coming from the city's contingency fund. We kind of identified that a better source might be the economic development. We call it the 205 fund. It's a special fund that has come from an old revolving loan fund that the city used to manage. So anyway, we went to EDB 3 days later, and the Economic Development Board said, hey, we'll put $100,000 of that fund money toward this. So Josh Miller, our community development person, he's our development services director, has done a wonderful job as well. A great success story, and working with Mackey, Main Street, EDB to get the applications reviewed. Sounds like we got a lot of applications, more than 50, and we were able to make awards of $78,000 to those businesses that will help them to just get through this tough time. We don't know when it's going to end. Nobody does. And now, actually, Josh is going to be going back to the Economic Development Board and saying, you know, there's $22,000 left. Are you willing to allow that to be carried forward, maybe for a second round, if it turns out that this goes on longer and that becomes appropriate? He's also been talking with Mackey and the Marshfield Utilities. They're looking at making contributions into that fund too. So it's a real success story for small businesses that qualify, Tom.
Yes, thank you for that information. Talking about that fund just for a moment, in your tenure here at the city and throughout your career as a city administrator, is that unique fund or have an EDB? I noticed that here in Marshfield and has an EDB, and in prior jobs really didn't have that. It seems like a really good fit for this community.
It does, Tom. I came here in January of 2011, and about a year and a half or so later we started working on establishing the EDB. I think that Jason Angel, our economic development person at the time, was a big part of that. The idea is that if you go to council meetings, you can't go to them now generally, you usually watch them on Facebook Live or wherever, but you see that they've got all these things to do, ordinances and resolutions and handling citizen complaints and policies. They don't have a lot of time to talk about economic development, and yet that's the most important thing that most small communities do. So we created the board and gave them the latitude to say, look, you've got some funds you can manage, you've got some ideas, you've got some good people, 2 members of the council, but the rest of the board is private citizens from various walks of life. A lot of them are in business and industry. They know how to do business loans and grants and stuff. And that group has really done a wonderful job over the years. This is just one more example.
Yeah, definitely, and you were able to use the monies from this instead of the contingency. And I'm curious how maybe other cities that don't have this had to do it a different way, which is lucky we had this.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of cities want to help, but if they don't have a fund to draw from, it's not good. And when we talk about contingency, and I totally respect Mayor McManus' idea, but that's the idea, is that you have that money set aside for the calendar year for what might come up that you don't know. What if there's extra snow plowing incidents than you planned? What if there's other expenses that we incur that we didn't expect? It's nice to have that contingency fund available for those. So this way we got to use monies that have been all along tied to economic development. And I just want to mention, if I can too, Tom, that the criteria includes making sure that we're getting good accountability. We make sure we're not loaning out money to people who have already gotten, or giving grants to people who have already gotten money from the federal programs. We want to make sure they're in good standing with the city in terms of having paid their taxes and so forth. But it's a program that's going to help a lot of people who are really hurting in that small business world.
Yeah, most definitely. And one last question I have in regards to the monies, will this be replenished down the road into this fund, the money that's used, or how does that work?
This is a grant program, not a loan program. Okay. So the monies will not come back, but that fund usually gets replenished over time. We get money from a dividend paid in to us by Marshfield Utilities every year. And Also, I think there used to be some old loan payments trickling in. I'm not sure if those are closed out. And of course, there's interest income that we earn. So over time, the fund, at least to some degree, is able to be replenished.
Great. All right. Anything else on the last council meeting we want to highlight here?
I don't think so, Tom.
Okay.
One of the items is coming back in a different version. We can touch on that when we get there.
All right. Well, let's lead right into our next council meeting. It's going to take place May 12th. That is a Tuesday, 6 o'clock normal time. The only difference is we're being electronic means, although we are allowing the public to attend if they call in ahead of time. Right, Steve?
Right, we are. We're asking for a little bit of lead time, like noon the day of the meeting. And you say, well, why do you do that? Because we're trying to promote, obviously, as everybody is, social distancing. It's a little bit awkward to think that we're meeting in person, but usually only some of the elected officials are in person. Others are participating from home. And the staff people are typically at home or in their offices. So there really aren't a lot of people in the council chambers, but we need to know how many are planning to come to the meeting in advance so that we can plan the room, how the chairs are set up to promote good, solid social distancing. And that comes up in our first item here, actually.
All righty. So they just need to reach out to you, Steve, I have on here, call you or email you, right?
Yep.
486-2003. Or steve.barg@ci.marshfield.wi.us, and that would be by noon Tuesday of that meeting if you plan to attend. And that leads us right into a public hearing, which is a little bit different. We haven't done that yet here.
No, we haven't, and this will be
COVID.
new, and we've had a lot of conversations with the city attorney, Tom, on how we do this, because typically a public hearing, everybody comes down who's got some concerns about the item, they take turns walking to the podium. And so how do we get public input? First of all, there's people who don't want to come here, and among those who would like to be here in person to talk to members of the council, we have to make sure that, again, we're providing for social distancing. So in this case, we have the Cleveland Street Reconstruction Project, which is underway now, a good project that's been waiting for years. And then we have some asphalt paving projects that are going forward. A lot of the cost of those projects, Tom, are picked up by the city. But there's a portion of the project that's picked up by the abutting property owners, depending upon the added benefit they get. Oftentimes, maybe you didn't have curb and gutter and sidewalk. Well, now you do. That's something you need to pay into. And even just the resurfacing costs, the residents pick up some portion of that. So this will be a time for people to connect and say, look, you're going to assess me, it looks like $1,500. I got a letter in the mail. I don't think this is fair. I mean, my property is only 50 feet wide, and you just did this 10 years ago. Why am I paying for it again? Any comments you wish to make, this is the time. But, as you said earlier, now you can do it via phone. You can do it by participating in the other ways in the meeting. You can send emails in advance. Or you can come to the meeting, tell us in advance, and we'll stage it so that we don't have too many people in the room at one time. And you can still go to the podium and talk to the council. So your chances to give input as to whether you have concerns or questions about these assessments is still there.
Now, this is the time for the public to speak to the council. Now, they can they call their older person and talk about this before?
Oh, they can. And I think the phone numbers and names of those people is out there. You probably know where they are more than I do to get a hold of people. You can also contact the staff person. When you get an assessment letter, it usually has the name of a staff person. It might be the city engineer or the public works director. Someone to call and say, look, can we talk about this? I can't imagine why I'm being assessed $2,000 for this project. And I don't think I'm getting that much benefit from it. So you can always talk to the staff person, but you can always call the mayor or a council person as well.
Yeah, and that just might help explain it without having to speak in front of the council. Although that's what it's for if you need to, but there's some options, and just want to make sure that our public knows those options, that they can voice their concern, definitely to a staff person like Tom Turchi.
So we want you to definitely understand it, and if you think it's wrong, to let us know. My street is going to be redone this year where I live here in town, and I got a proposed assessment. It talks about what it covers, how much I'm paying in compared to others, compared to the city covering the lion's share of the cost. But still, you look at it and you say, well, this doesn't all make sense to me. I want to talk to someone. And this is your opportunity to ask those kind of questions.
Now, wouldn't that be something, Steve, you call in on a public hearing?
Yeah. Can I disguise my voice? Hi, I live on...
I don't know if you could do that. I don't know how that would work if you had to. And maybe conflict of interest, I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird because my wife and I are taxpayers, and we live up in the north end of town, not far from Fleet Farm. And if we have a question or concern, we have the right to ask it like anybody else.
You do.
I work at City Hall, so I know that I can talk to engineering staff, every day that I'm there. But yeah, as a taxpayer, you have that right.
Yeah, I just thought to ask that.
Yeah, good question.
So, all right, let's move on from our public hearing. That's going to be right at the beginning of the meeting into another piece by our finance director, Ron Allman. You're going to have him talk about our situation, maybe with COVID-19, if it affects our funding.
Yeah, it's interesting because, working at City Hall, I tend not to think of us as a business. We're not really a business, but we're an organization that gets affected by COVID-19 like others. And the mayor and the council president and perhaps others have questions about how are we doing? It's been almost 60 days. Are our revenues down? Are our expenses up? Is this posing as a financial problem for the city of Marshfield, Tom? And the report Ron is going to give is going to suggest, I think, that it's not a significant issue for us as it is for businesses. If your doors are closed, what's your revenue? Zero. And your expenses may be down too, but you still have to pay rent or you still have to pay utility costs and some other charges. So, we're going to kind of update the council. And there are some things that have altered a little bit. For example, travel. Staff people have conferences they go to. Well, those conferences are being canceled. I'm supposed to go to one in June, and that's already been canceled. So as a result, there's cost savings there to the city that I'm not traveling to go to that conference. Other things, maybe we've had to buy a few more supplies, cleaning supplies, disinfectant. So just trying to get a handle for the council on where do we stand so far, plus or minus, compared to what we normally would expect.
All right. Our HR director, Jen Rakeu, last time had spoke at our last meeting, when we mentioned a little bit ago about travel restrictions for our employees. She's going to highlight a little bit more information about that, as I'm understanding, right?
She is, Tom. Can I go back to the last item first?
Oh, yes, please.
One more thing I want the public to know. There is federal grant money out there to cities as well. We talked about the business part, but there's to cities for added expenses incurred because of COVID-19. It's fairly tightly framed, and the ones we look like we're going to qualify for are the extra election expenses we incurred to run a good, healthy, safe election, and that included some disinfectant and cleaning costs too, and then personal protective equipment that the police and fire have had to get to EMS to be able to do their work and still be kept healthy when they're dealing with patients. So there is going to be some reimbursement coming to the city for some of those costs, and we definitely will apply. But back to your question about the one that Jen Rakeu had. 2 weeks ago, Jen proposed that we look at very limited travel restrictions on our employees because we're trying to keep everyone safe. And you realize that if you come back from a vacation infected with COVID-19, you may well be exposing your coworkers to that. So we want to make sure that everybody's being kept safe as good as possible. The council saw that policy proposal as too restrictive. Tom, I think you and I have talked about this a little bit too. The state is now starting to open things a little bit. You can go camping, campgrounds are open. You can go fishing, you can go golfing, and yet, while they're opening those things and allowing certain with restrictions for those to go on, what about employees? We're still trying to protect ourselves. So what I think Jen is going to come back with is just to say, okay, that policy didn't get passed. Just so you know, council, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at the CDC. We're looking at Wood County and Marathon County. We're looking at trying to work with our employees to be educated and to make the best possible decisions, short of having a policy restriction over their head. And we have good staff. I think we have people who are very sensible. They want the best for themselves and their employees, and I think that we'll do well. But this is just kind of a follow-up to that the discussion from back in late April.
Yeah, and her job and the city officials is to make sure that everybody's protected too, and that's why that really kind of came up because you got to think about other coworkers. It happens. Look at these meat plants that have happened, and with this virus, unfortunately, it spreads so quickly that it's before you know it, you even have it. So I think it's like you say, it's by person. It's by individual and case by case, I should say, process. So we'll see what Jen
Yeah.
has to say and hear what the council reaction, or if there is one.
Yeah, we've been blessed so far, Tom, to not have many cases in central Wisconsin, but that could change any day.
It could, and we're ready as a city and prepared, I believe, to take that if that was to happen, which is all good on planning by a lot of entities, not just the city, the hospital, the school, really a whole gamut of individuals in our community.
Right.
So that leads us into a closed session item that you could talk about a little bit, I believe.
Yeah, Tom, we have a 5-year agreement with the Marshfield Convention and Visitors Bureau. I believe they're now called Visit Marshfield, and they do a great job of promoting the city, bringing different events to town, conferences, conventions, special events. You know, they're at the heart of the Maple Fall Fest, which I hope can go forward in September, and that COVID doesn't affect that. They do great work over there, Matt McLean and his board. But we're in the 4th year of that 5-year agreement, and the way that the agreement is written, it says that if there's any thought that the city wants to renegotiate the contract, try to modify some of the terms for whatever reason, that we're supposed to let them know by the end of the 4th year. Well, we're nearing the end of the 4th year. That comes during the summer of this year, a couple months down the road. And so I want to walk through the council, how the agreement's been working, any questions or concerns that have been discussed and addressed in the past, and get a sense of whether they want to look at renegotiating for the 5-year period that would begin later in 2021, or if they just want to continue this agreement for another series of years. And so this will just be kind of sharing with the council where we at in terms of negotiating and how they want me to proceed. But going forward, just so everybody knows, we're going to continue to have a good, strong relationship with Visit Marshfield, and it's good for the city all around.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to finding out maybe some information on that, maybe at our next council preview, since this will take place after we broadcast. And maybe if there's decision made, that you'll let us know.
I will. It's one of those things in closed session. Sometimes I can tell you the next meeting that we get together for this.
Right.
Other times it may take several discussions in closed session. You never really know, but I'll always report to you what I can.
Yeah, and possibly if we have our news conference with our fellow media entities on that Thursday, which I'm not sure if we will yet or not, but usually that's decided by Bob or yourself.
Yep, we've been trying to hold those again.
Trying to hold those, and we'll see what happens on that and get that word out. Well, that leads us right into CIP, and if people want to know what CIP stands for, is Capital Improvement Plan. That's a pretty common term among cities throughout the United States, and this is our 2nd year on a process that was vetted through Dan Kinnick, Public Works, although you always probably did something like a CIP, but I would think, or something similar. But let's talk about upcoming public, I'll call it a public meeting, because it is for the public too to watch and see. When is that happening?
That'll be on Thursday, May 14th, 2 days after the next council meeting, also at 6 p.m. So there'll be 2 council meetings in 3 nights that you can tap into and view through one of the various platforms. But the CIP is an annual document. I always call it a blueprint. The budget is a fixed document. If the budget says you have this much money to spend on parks, that's what you have. And if you decide you want to do something different, you got to transfer money from another account with council permission. That is a very firm document. The CIP is a 5-year blueprint. It's a plan, and I always equate it, Tom, to what you might do at home, where you might be talking to your spouse and say, what do we want to do in the next 5 years? We want to go on a vacation to Florida. We want to replace the old beater car we have in the driveway, and we want to upgrade the landscaping, which has gotten pretty poor. And then you start saying, well, what's most important? Well, I think the car is the most important. That doesn't have much life in it. Well, let's do that next year. That's what we do between streets, building upgrades, park facility upgrades, whatever. We try to rank them by priority order and slot them into years. For this case, it'll be from 2021 through 2025, and figure out what can we afford. And just like at home, you might say, we can't afford all 3 of those. What's going to go? Well, we're not going to do the vacation. Sorry, too bad. We have the same decisions we have to make here at staff level before we bring this to the council. We started out, Tom, with about, I think, let me see what the final product is, several $1 million more requested than we could afford. So we had to start paring it down. And what you have in front of you right now is a plan that I think it's about $25 million total in spending. Let's see. Well, I guess the grand total, counting everything, is more like $40 million over 5 years. But that includes everything that we do. The most important thing we'll be probably talking about is the long-term debt. And I can go into that in a minute. But all the things we have for money, we have fees, we have funds to draw from, we have room tax monies, we have tax dollars. But the big one is borrowing funds. And they have to come together to meet the needs of what we plan to accomplish.
Well, I'm paging through this as you talk, and people may not see me on camera doing that, but there's a lot of stuff in here. Now, this meeting, the council, do they participate? Do they just listen on this meeting? How does that work?
They won't be making any decisions at all on the 14th. What they'll do is ask a lot of questions. For example, let's say Tom Turchie's bringing forth a street plan, and he says, in 2023, we plan to do this street. You might hear somebody say, Tom, we can't wait till 2023. I live in that area. I get a lot of complaints from my constituents. Is there any way we can move that up? Or you might get questions on, why do we have to do that street? It looks pretty good to me. Don't we have worse streets than that? So it's going to be a lot of Q&A as to why the items that are on here, why others might have been omitted that they're looking for, and why the priorities that have been given in terms of what year they're slotted.
Let's break this down just for a bit. Can you highlight maybe a couple of these projects? And then tell me what this long-term debt, there's a lot of pieces under what that is. Okay,
first of all, we had a 5-year financial plan approved recently. I think maybe many of our viewers remember that back in February. And according to that, it dictates how much money we can spend and how much we expect to take in. And along with that, we've committed ourselves now, not that we haven't done this before, but we're going to firmly commit ourselves to never spending are borrowing more money than we're paying back in principal. That's good as a homeowner too, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a certain amount of debt, you don't want to borrow more than you pay back in principal. The exceptions are the big one-time projects. So the first project on your list here is the pool, the aquatic center. And it's a $6 million project, $3 million public, $3 million private. Still working on getting the final donations from private donors, but we're planning on 2021 to borrow $3 million for this project. That is outside of the amount we normally expect to borrow because it's one of those one-time, we used to call them generational projects. But then you have Economic Development Fund. We're planning on doing some improvements with the facade programming for Wenzel Family Plaza, hoping to do some more redevelopment, planning on West 2nd Street downtown, hoping to acquire more land for industrial purposes. We're kind of running out on land in Yellowstone Industrial Park. Then we have the fees in EMS. They cover a lot of things that are done with where we have to buy new ambulances and equipment for the EMS department. Wastewater always has a lot of projects, sanitary sewer lining and replacement. Things people don't see, but we need to do them to keep up on everything. And then we move into other purposes, fees and fund balance. The big one we get down to eventually on page 3, which is where you're talking, is long-term debt. That is where most of the focus of the CIP meetings are, Tom. What projects, and these are probably 90% or at least 80% street projects, what are the big ones? What are the most important ones? And the biggest ones we do are called reconstructions. That's where just putting another, grinding up the surface and putting another 2 inches of asphalt is not going to cut it. The base is substandard, we need utilities replaced or whatever. The big ones we're looking at in the coming 5 years are East 17th Street by the fairgrounds, West, where's West 5th Street. Oh, I'm sorry, the Lincoln and Adler area is a big one too. I thought West 5th Street, I guess we got that one going forward. And then, of course, all the asphalt mill and overlay. We try to do about $2 million a year in grinding up existing surfaces and laying down new asphalt. And that project, that work is starting up right now, really soon, for the 2020 projects. Otherwise, a lot of keeping up facilities and equipment. We do roofing replacements and all these kind of things with these funds. These are the bigger projects. These are where the big dollar amounts are. And then the parks and trails. Down at the bottom of page 3, you see the parking lot for one park, the softball field for another park, and trail projects, Adler Road Trail, cemetery road maintenance to keep the roads good when people come out and visit the cemetery. These all come from long-term debt money.
Okay, so when you mean long-term, we have to borrow for this, and we get so much time to pay it back, just like a general homeowner?
Yeah, we can use either 10-year notes or 20-year borrowing instruments, and depends on what we're paying back. If you're doing a major street project, sometimes you say, look, hey, let's make it a 20-year project. Debt instrument, because we want people who move into town later to be paying their share too. A lot of what we've done historically has been on 10-year notes.
10-year note. And is that per project, or how does that work? Lumped in on this when you ask for that
We
money?
kind of lump it all together.
Okay.
If you turn to the top of page 4, you'll see that it's a single line. It's too bad this didn't come out on page 3, but that is a long-term debt that we're proposing for each year. And as you see, we're trying to stay in that $3 to $3.5 million per year. But we have the first year, we have the pool.
Right.
And then in 2023, there's going to be a need to do some revisiting and trimming later on. We just couldn't package everything down to where we needed to get to. But basically, we're going to borrow about $20 million over 5 years, Tom, and that's to do most of the major work that's really visible to the community when you're out driving about.
But we just borrow the piece in here that we're seeing under the years, $6 million, $3 million at a time.
Correct.
We're not taking that whole lump.
No.
Because nothing's going to happen until 2024, 2025. Although,
We borrow annually.
Yeah, borrow annually. Do we look at rates?
What we do, and rates are very good right now. We try to time borrowing to rates. Most times we borrow in the late spring or early summer for the projects. We've really pared down our borrowing a little bit. A couple of years ago, we got up to where we were at 60% of what the state said we could borrow. Now I think we're back down around 55 or 56%. That's really important because Moody's, every time we borrow money, and this will be coming up in a couple months, Tom, every time that we borrow money, they look at where we are in terms of how much we owe. Same as they would to a person borrowing money, right? Mm-hmm. And they evaluate you as a risk. And that determines, usually how many bidders we get and what interest rates we get based upon the rating that they give to our bonds.
And that was done already this year. Is that correct? Some of it,
I'm trying to think when we had when we issue our next bond, we'll have to get another rating from Moody's.
So you have to get a new rating every time.
Every year they look at the updated information about how are your TIF districts doing, how's your general fund balance, how's your debt looking, how's your budget in general playing out, and they assign you a rating based upon how strong they think you are financially. And
then that goes out to the people that will loan you the money.
Correct.
And the risk is determined by like a AA or AAA standard.
Yeah. I think we're AA3, and that's what they look at, and they say, okay, this is a good risk, and I think I want to bid on this bond. And what you want to do is you want to get 4, 5, 6 bidders. What hurts is when you only get 1 or 2. Oftentimes the interest rates that follow from that are not as competitive.
Right. But recently we've been able to lower our interest rates on some of these previous bonds. Is that right?
We have. In fact, Marshfield Utilities just did a bond issue where they got 1.3%. That's amazing. Yeah. And we're not going to get quite that good, but hopefully we'll come in between 1.5% and 2% when we go out to the market, in a month or two. And that does help. When you keep those interest costs down over a period of 10 or 20 years, that does make a big difference.
Now, does that go over prime, or is that just the total interest rate?
That's the total interest rate, yeah.
Oh, so it's a little bit different than our general 30-year home that's prime plus what the banks want to make.
Yeah, no, this is the interest rate.
So that's not too bad, actually. 2% is pretty, or 1.3% on a loan of $17 million is not a lot. I mean, they're making some, but not a ton.
No, and that's why there's a lot of interest these days in the borrowing, because it's a good time to do projects with the interest rates being so low.
All right, well, people can look forward to that meeting. It is going to be broadcasted on all our platforms, Facebook, city website, television, and you'll be able to watch that live, presented by our department heads to the council. The council can take that in and ask questions at that time, but no decisions will be made, and those decisions are made at a council meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, what happens, we've also got a second work session for the CIP set for May 28th, 2 weeks later. Last year we didn't need the session. We got through the first session, it was all good, and then we will schedule it sometime in June for review and approval as a document.
All right. Well, anything else, Steve? I know we may have went over a little bit, but CIP is an important process. It's our map, shall I say, where we're going over the next 4 years, 5 years.
5 years.
5 years.
Yep. 2021 to 2025.
That changes every year. These other things can change in 2022, 23, but this gives a guide, shall I say. Yep. All right. Well, thanks for all that information, and we will leave our audience with that, and they can tune in throughout the week before council and watch this. Again, this replays on our television if you missed it or tuned in late, always right before our council meeting takes place. So you can get your plate of food and watch us, and then tune right into the council meeting after this, so you already know everything that's going to take place, and I think through this council preview, and that's for our TV viewers. Otherwise, you can watch us anytime on our YouTube channel on demand, and you can get that off our website, ci.marshfield.ws. I know I went through that fast. And otherwise, just Google us, City of Marshfield, and look for on-demand or meeting videos, and you should be able to find it and find all those past videos. Again, thanks, Steve, for coming. Thank you guys for watching us on our council preview that we do every 2 weeks, and we'll be back again coming up later in May.